Hi guys, slightly shorter video here today. We're going to be looking at the 6 and 9 mark questions and a few final little tips before the exam. Again, this is only a little knowledge booster, so we're not going to be too long in this clip. So one of the words that come up quite a lot in the exam will be the assess style question. Now, what will this look like? It could be a 6 mark question where it says assess the importance of something, in this case, inaccessibility and extreme temperature. It could be assessing the extent to which something is the most important factor, or if we are looking to look at the exam board itself, it's making an informed judgment on something. Okay, so for this one here, if we are assessing the extent, that means we are looking for which factor is the most important, etc. Now, the second part that usually comes with assess is the to what extent. Now, usually that means to judge the importance or success of something. Now, key phrases you want to be using here are to a high extent, to a low extent, to some extent, in that link part of your PEEL paragraph. So let's have a look at a question here. Assess the extent to which prediction is the most important factor in reducing the effects of tropical storms. What is it really asking? Is prediction the best way to reduce the impact of hurricanes, or are preparation or protection better? So, what will I include in my 9 mark answer? I will always introduce with my conclusion or evaluation. I'm going to want 2 or 3 peel paragraphs that's making a clear point, providing evidence, which is usually be a case study, explaining this, actually explaining what your point is, and then linking it back to the question. In this case, saying, therefore, this increases the extent or to some extent, whatever. And then finally, a conclusion as well. So let's have a look at my answer. I said, overall, prediction is the best strategy, but preparation can also have a large but less significant impact. I'm introducing with my conclusion. What I then add in is a point evidence explain link paragraph. So, how does prediction work? Well, scientists can use satellite images to track and predict the landfall of tropical storms. Point. For example, the US National Hurricane Center can predict when hurricanes will make landfall to a high degree of accuracy. I've provided some evidence there as well. Prediction allows countries to set out an alert, allowing people to evacuate. As people are evacuated, this reduces the potential for the storm to cause death and injury, significantly reducing the impact. I've then explained it. This increases the extent to which prediction is the best way to reduce the effects of tropical storms. On the other side of the argument, then, now the important thing to remember is when we are doing an assess question, we always have to have a concurrent argument throughout our theme. So in this question here, I've already spoken about prediction. I'm going to want to bring in preparation or protection in this one as well. If it was just assessing um, something, it's weighing up different factors against each other. So for my other argument, I might say, however, prediction does not always fully reduce the impact of tropical storms. Point, despite tracking, Typhoon Haiyan killed 6,190 people and destroyed 90% of Tacloban city. There's my evidence. This suggests that prediction alone is not a fail-proof method of reducing the effects of tropical storms. As such, other methods are needed, reducing the extent to which prediction is most important. So that link there is really, really clear that I've linked it back to the question to show my argument. Now, the next type of question then that comes in with this is a do you agree question. Now, it has to be really, really clear that whether it is an assess question, a do you agree question, or a evaluate question, you always have to have an argument throughout your answer. Now, sometimes the argument is harder to find than others. So if the question was assess the effects of climate change, for example, I would be assessing which effects are worse. So sea level rise, droughts, crop failures, which one is the worst one? The do you agree is slightly easier but you have to make sure you've got both those sides of the argument, and to get the 9 out of 9, you've got to make sure you include those links as well. So yes, I agree that both mitigation and adaptation are important, but in my opinion, adaptation is the most important for LICs that are facing climate change now. I'll let you read through this at your own leisure. You might want to pause the video to have a quick read. But what I then do is a very clear peel paragraph for mitigation, a very clear peel paragraph for adaptation, and then I provide a conclusion or evaluation at the end. If in my exam I give a absolutely wonderful essay about mitigation and I do 3 or 4 factors and that's all I speak about, I'm going to be capped at 3 marks. I'm not going to get a significant number. You have to include the concurrent argument throughout. And my advice would be, while you won't necessarily have time to make a plan, you want to think of what your judgment's going to be at the start and then try and make your answer match that introduced with the conclusion at the end of it. So I've basically said that the only strategy for LICs is adaptation, and I make that argument clear throughout that answer. The other question you can get asked is the evaluate question. Now, this one is judging from available evidence. So again, this is more likely to come up in paper 2 than paper 1, but you want to be evaluating the effectiveness of an urban transport scheme you have studied. So let's have a look at the exam answers for this one. Now, for our case study, you guys would talk about the Liverpool integrated transport system. So the Liverpool buses, the Liverpool ferries, the Liverpool trains, etc. These guys have talked about the London Underground system. And again, I'll let you pause and read the depth of this video, because what it does is it weighs up very clearly both sides of the argument with evidence. And then at the very bottom, it gives an evaluation or a conclusion. At the bottom, and this one here actually scored 8 out of 9 with 3 spag marks. So it's a really, really significant 11 out of 12, which is well into a grade 9. And if you actually look at that answer, it is quite attainable. If you make sure, similar with that Cayman Islands question, you've got to weigh up both sides. If it says assess, if it says evaluate, or if it says to what extent, there's always going to be a judgment in there. And I'll go back to this question here. Assess how effective your presentation techniques were in representing the data collected in this inquiry. And that's a fieldwork type question. Now, for this one, all I do is I do one peel paragraph about how they were effective, one peel paragraph how they weren't effective, and then I'd give a conclusion in the end. If we're linking it back to the case study, if we are assessing the challenges to development, we are looking at the different challenges, such as extreme temperature, extreme heat, etc., and we are weighing them up and giving a judgment. That's where you get those top marks, by giving the judgment at the end. So to finish off this short little video, what I've got for you is a table with some example, obviously not fully exam style, but to give you the gist of it. Now, there are 5 questions here. Assess the effects of a named tropical storm. The effects of deforestation are more global than local. Do you agree? Assess the reasons people still live in areas prone to natural disasters. To what extent is desertification caused by human action? And finally, flooding is mainly caused by physical factors. Do you agree? My strong advice would be to pause the video here, and I would like you to either write down or verbalize what would your 2 peel paragraphs be, your argument 1 and your argument 2, and what conclusion are you going to draw at the end. So I'll say that again. Look at these questions. You might want to bullet point them down. You might want to just verbalize them out loud in the video while you've paused it. But what 2 arguments would you go for there? Peel paragraph argument 1, peel paragraph argument 2, and what sort of conclusion or judgment could you draw from those? So pause the video and have a go. So I'm assuming you have now had a go at this video. So let's have a look at what I would go for. Assess the effects of a named tropical storm. But if I'm assessing the effects, I'm weighing up basically which is the worst one. So initially, I think in this argument, my first paragraph will be about the primary effects of Haiyan. I talk all about the 6,190 deaths. I talk about 90% of Tacloban being destroyed, 4 million people being made homeless by those storm surges and by those really high wind speeds as well. My argument two will probably be on the secondary effects of Haiyan here, like the spread of disease, um, the uh, the issues they had with their response, etc. And then to conclude, I just give which one do I think is worse. So of the impacts I've spoken about, which one could be worse? You don't have to do it this way. You could do it where you do the primary effects, talking about the wind speed as one effect, and then what would that cause, and then the storm surge and flooding as a secondary one. But I think that's an easier way of structuring it. For the deforestation, well, the global effects, the main one will be climate change. And you'd be arguing how chopping down forests can have a whole number of issues. In particular, when you remove those trees, there's less photosynthesis. There's also when you actually chop down a tree, all the carbon that's been stored inside it is then released, enhancing the greenhouse effect. Cattle ranching, um, you know, mining, all these things also have huge um, environmental downsides. The local effects would be things like soil erosion, which we talked about on the case study videos, so give that a watch if these aren't ringing a bell, and biodiversity loss in the Amazon. Soil erosion resulting in landslides can result in land becoming infertile. And once I've done these two paragraphs or these two kind of main arguments, I'd give a judgment here that climate change will always exacerbate local issues. So for my judgment here, yeah, the local issues are bad, but they'll also be made worse by climate change. If we stop climate change, a lot of those local effects are less significant. And the word exacerbate just means made worse by. It's a really great word to use in your conclusions. The next one, assess the reasons people still live in areas prone to natural disasters. Well, I think the main reason is economic gain, tourism, the fertile soils for agriculture, the minerals like sulfur, but I've got to assess the reasons here. So I need another argument. I've talked about how there's economic gains here, but what are the other reasons why people have to live in these areas? Well, a lot of the time, they have a lack of other options, don't they? So there's no money to move. So on the one hand, I'm saying, well, in areas such as, around Mount Etna, around Mount Vesuvius, there's huge tourism opportunities, positive multiplier effects. We've got this fertile soil to create really high yield agriculture areas. But actually, in some parts of the world, they don't have the option to move. They don't have the money to move house and up sticks like we would say they did. And then my judgment would just be, well, which is the main reason of those? Which would I say is the main reason why people live in areas prone to natural disasters? Doesn't matter which one you choose, but you've got to give that judgment. To what extent is desertification caused by human action? Well, you could argue it's human caused. Population rise has led to overcultivation and deforestation, both of which have meant there is more uh, soil erosion from the soil not being binded together by plants, the nutrients being taken out of the soil and turned into infertile desert land. But also, it is natural caused as well. Drought and drought caused by climate change in particular can cause the soil to dry out. The wind and the water can then erode it, which starts that cycle of desertification. But what's really important here is, let's say this would be worded as the human actions on the fringes of hot deserts, by the way. But let's say you've got this, the human and natural causes. Give me an overall, please, at the end. Doesn't matter which one you choose. I want some sort of judgment. And then lastly, flooding is mainly caused by physical factors. Do you agree? Again, I want to talk about my physical facts. I'm going to choose a couple. I might choose one or two. Heavy precipitation, geology, how permeable or impermeable the rock is. If there's really, really steep slopes in a drainage basin, there's going to be increased surface runoff at a really quick speed. Remember, the key to flooding is how quickly the water enters the river. If there's really fast surface runoff, we are often going to get a flood event. So impermeable rock, high precipitation, and very steep slopes would cause flooding to become more likely. But also, humans have had a great role in this. Deforestation, in particular, has removed rainwater interception, which increases surface runoff speed. We've also had rapid urbanization through concreting is impermeable, which increases greater surface runoff. And then obviously we can finish off by saying there that the human impacts exacerbates physical causes. And that's what my argument would always be for flooding. But please do beware in the exam, make sure that you are following this structure and you will not go far wrong on any 6 or 9 mark question by doing that. There should always be an argument if we are using these words. If it's explain, it's slightly different. But when we've got to what extent, assess or evaluate, there are always going to be differing sides and there's always going to be a judgment that you need to find. Thank you for listening. You can rewind this video, you can make some notes, you can have a go at any of these questions, you could try answering yourself. There are 2 other videos available at the moment. Those are the case study revision ones and also the tricky topics guide as well, which is a slightly longer video on some of the harder parts of the exam that I think might be able to come up this year. Thank you very much.